Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Exodus chapters 19 through 40 in our continuing study of the Old Testament. Exodus 19, beginning verse 3, Moses went up to God. They're at Mount Sinai now, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the sons of Israel, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." Now, that's not literal wings, but the idea is that God has been a covering to them, has led them down here to Mount Sinai, has kept them alive, given them food, given them water. He's taken care of them. Verse 5, "Now then, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my commandment," notice the two requirements: obey my voice, keep my covenant, excuse me, "then you will be my own possession among all the peoples, for all the earth is mine." God says, "Look, I own it all, but I've set you apart, O Israel, to be my special people, my representative sampling, if we can call it that." Verse 6, "And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests." Remember what a priest is. A priest is somebody that represents the people to God, so that the Israelites are going to be an entire kingdom. They have priests, but they're going to be an entire kingdom of priests, as their kingdom represents all people to God, and a holy nation. And then we finish up, "These are the words that you shall speak." This is God speaking to Moses, "that you shall speak to the sons of Israel." So we have God who's the king, and then Moses is the prophet, and then Aaron is the priest. Now, when we get to the New Testament, we find out that Jesus fulfills all three of those offices. He is both prophet, priest, and king. Next, we see in chapter 20 the Ten Commandments. Now, the Ten Commandments are given, they're singular. In the Old English, we would say thou instead of ye. Ye is plural, thou is singular. Spoken to each person that as the commandments are given. They're not collective, they're singular. They can be divided into two major groups. There are those, the first four are directed toward God, and then beginning with number 5 and all the way to the end, they are going to be directed toward people, toward each other, how to get along with each other. The first four commands deal with Israel's relationship with the Lord, how they are to understand God. They're only to have one God. They're not to make images of him. They are to keep his name holy. And then the last 6 are going to deal with men's relationships with one another, how to get along with others, starting with your parents, respect for parents, and then don't steal, don't kill, don't bear false witness, don't no adultery, all of those. In the first 4 commandments, there's reasons given for each command, because they were totally unique. In the last 6, except for coveting, there's no reasons given, and even with coveting, there's no reasons given. Although it's explained what it entails a bit more. There's a little bit of an explanation there. As we said, in the first 4 commandments, they were completely unique to this Constitution. No other society in the ancient world had laws about having only one God. People had all sorts of gods. No one else had a command about forbidding images of God. Everyone had images of their God. No one else had a command about how to take the Lord's name. That just wasn't done. When we get to the last 6 commands, these laws are common. No adultery, no killing, respect for parents, no stealing, no false witness. Those were common to most of the ancient cultures of that day, even down, in some cases, even down to the wording. Now, we said they're divided into 2 groups, those directed toward God, those that are directed toward men. But then we're going to have a number of laws that follow. I refer to them as stipulations, or sometimes I refer to them as the what about. For example, there's no killing, but what about this particular situation? And so these will be further interpretations of the 10 Commandments. And that's going to take us through chapter 21, 22, and 23, where there are a number of other commands that are given, but they all fit into at least one of the 10. The Ten Commandments are almost like a table of contents, and then the other commands are those either explained or expanded or related. We come to Exodus chapter 24, and we read in verse 9, Then Moses went up with Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and they're going to approach the mountain with these elders of Israel. Notice, and they saw the God of Israel. Now, you can't really see God, so I'm not sure what it is they saw, but it's something that represented God. And under his feet there appeared to be a pavement of sapphire as clear as the sky itself. This was all, I think, almost like an otherworldly experience where they see something that is representing God, and there's a pavement of sapphire. It reminds me a little bit of Revelation chapter 4, verse 6, where John the writer in the book of Revelation has a heavenly experience. He's caught up in the spirit to the very heavens itself. And we read in chapter 4, verse 6, and before the throne there was something like a sea of glass, like crystal. Now, it doesn't say what color it was. Here it does, a pavement of sapphire. And later on, when we get to Revelation chapter 21, verse 21, the New Jerusalem is described, where the street of the city was pure gold, like transparent glass. And here, this, seems to have a transparency too, as clear as the sky itself. That sounds like something that might have been transparent. I don't know what to make of that. I think it's quite remarkable. But verse 11, yet he did not stretch out his hand against the nobles of the sons of Israel. In other words, they were allowed to approach God. They were allowed to see something that was otherworldly. And they saw God, and they ate and drank. And this just echoes with the New Testament idea of the Lord's Supper, where we partake with him and of him. Now, it doesn't say that they ate and drank of the Lord's body and blood. That hadn't happened yet. But there's something looking forward to what we see in the New Testament. They saw God, and they ate, and they drank. And this was indeed a communion. Not necessarily the same thing that we see in the New Testament, but certainly a communion. Verse 12, now the Lord said to Moses, come up to me on the mountain and remain there, and I will give you the stone tablets with the law and the commandment which I have written for their instruction. So we're going to see the law, at least the outline of the law, maybe just the Ten Commandments, written on these stone tablets. This is a picture actually of something called the Gezer tablet. Now, it's not one of the Ten Commandments, but it shows an example of a tablet. This one's small enough it can fit in the palm of my hand. I've actually got a life-size replica of it in my office that I oftentimes show my students. And I know that the Ten Commandments have sometimes been pictured as though they were these big, giant, things of stone. They might have been actually quite small. The reason I say that is because verse 15, the two tablets of the testimony in his hand. Now, I'm not saying that it was necessarily that he had them both in one hand, but that's what it says. Tablets which were written on both sides, notice front and back. They were written on one side and the other. Now, we're going to see that imagery later on in the Old Testament of scrolls that had writing front and back. Same thing with these tablets of the law. And notice there's two of them. Why are there two? The reason there's two, I used to think, that you couldn't fit it all on one, so you had to have like 2 pages. No, that's not it. That's not the case at all. Rather, when you entered into a covenant, and these are tablets of a covenant, you always make 2 copies, one for each party. One party for, in this case, is Moses and the Israelites. The other party is going to be God himself. And yet, both of them are going to be given to Moses because God will be eventually in their midst. Now, here's our outline for Exodus. I told you I was going to give you a more extensive one than the one we started. We said before 10 commands, I'm sorry, 10 plagues, 10 commands, and 10 items in the tabernacle. This is a little bit more extensive. In chapters 1 through 13, God meets Moses, and the Israelite exits or has its exodus from Egypt. Next, we had a rebellion thing. Remember how they were ready to stone Moses? Really, they wanted to get at God. That was in chapter 17. And then from that, we see the covenant and the covenant laws and the commands given here with the 10 commandments and the stipulations, and then the passage we just looked at in chapter 24, where the covenant is affirmed and God meets with the elders of Israel, and they see. I'm going to just say it the way the passage says. It says they saw him and they ate and drank, and that's the pivotal point in the whole story. Next, we're going to see commands for building the tabernacle, and that will go from chapter 25 to chapter 31. That's like 7 chapters of commands that are given. Next, after that, we're going to see another rebellion. This will be the golden calf incident. And then finally, we're going to see the tabernacle built. And at the end of that, God's going to enter the building. So don't, that's a spoiler, but that's how the book is going to end. Now, chapter 31, verse 18, when he had finished speaking with him on Mount Sinai, he gave Moses the 2 tablets of the testimony, tablets of stone, written by the finger of God. Go sometime and look in the New Testament for that reference of the finger of God. It might surprise you to see that you see Jesus operating by the power of the finger of God. That's sort of an interesting phrase. But notice 2 tablets given, uh, one for one for the Israelites, one for God, and yet they're both going to be together. Now, in those instructions for the tabernacle, which now follow, the tabernacle is going to be a tent, but it's actually specified that it has a sort of, and everything's portable, a portable wall that's set up around it with its entrance on the east side. And so as you went into the east, first there would be the brazen altar. This is the altar, this is outside the tabernacle, and on this altar, the animals will be both killed and burnt so that you can have what's called a whole burnt offering. Actually, the Hebrew talks about literally an ascending offering. It goes up in smoke, and it's burnt up. And every morning, every evening, there will be a sacrifice that's made, and then of the sacrifice as well. These all take place on the brazen altar. Notice it's portable. You can carry it through the wilderness, so it's got carrying rods that are built with it. Everything in the tabernacle has to be portable because at a moment's notice, when God says so, they might be taking down the tabernacle, packing it up, and taking it with them to some other place in the wilderness, or eventually to the promised land. As you get to the tabernacle, but still outside the tabernacle, is a laver of water. Again, this is portable, but this a big laver of water, and it has to be filled with water. And this is where you're going to do the cleansing ceremony for the priests. The tabernacle itself is set up in 2 sections. So it's a long rectangular affair. It has these boards that are set up to serve as its walls. Yes, it's got a tent over it, but it has this setup so that you go into the tabernacle and you have one section of it, and then there's a veil inside separating that from the innermost part, the very holy place. The way you say that in Hebrews, you say Holy of Holies. You say it twice, and that just means the very holy place. Once you get in, there are going to be several articles of furniture. One is a table of showbread, a table with 12 loaves of bread representing the 12 tribes of Israel. Again, notice the carrying sticks that you have with that. On the other side, you have a lampstand, and the lampstand is shaped like a tree with branches, so that it has flowers and bulbs and leaves that are graven into it. And at the end of each branch of the lamp, you have a bulb, like a flower's bulb, that is designed to hold oil. And so you can take a wick and you can burn the wick, and that will cause the oil will feed that, and it will bring light. A tree of light representing a tree of life. You see, it's Eden. It's like a return to Eden. And then just before you get to the Holy of Holies, there's another altar. This is a much smaller one. This is called the altar of incense. Um, it's overlaid with gold. And every morning and every evening, once the sacrifice has been made, um, a priest will come into the tabernacle and he will sprinkle incense upon this altar, and it will flare up. There's fire on it, and it will flare up. And when incense burns, it smells very sweetly. So this is going to give a sweet smell to the tabernacle. Remember, they didn't have soap and water back then. So um, it's both cleansing and smelling sweetly, and it represents, he would do this at the time of the morning and evening prayers. So the smell, the aroma, that signifies the prayers of God's people, which are sweet smelling and they're rising up to heaven. And you could see the worship, but you could also smell the worship. Now, next you have the veil, and beyond the veil, there's one article of furniture. This is the very presence of God, and this is the Ark of the Covenant. Now, I like the picture. However, from what I've read, the poles seem to be oriented in the wrong way, but we'll give it that. They would actually be coming out toward us, if I think it was more accurate. This is a box made of wood, but it is overlaid with gold. And then the top of the box, the top of the ark, is of solid gold, and it has graven upon it the statues of two mighty angels, two cherubim. And these angels they have their wings overstretched over the ark. They are looking not at the surface of the ark, they're looking at the space in between, which represents the presence of God. This represents the throne of God. And so God's throne would be there in the Holy of Holies. Now, chapter 32, after the instructions have been given, verse 19, it came about as soon as Moses came near the camp, he's coming down with the tablets, that he saw the calf. What has happened is while he's been up on the mountain, Aaron and the people have been making a golden calf to represent God. Now, they're not saying that we're not going to worship some other God. They're using this as a representation of God, but that's not good. That's bad. God had said in the commandments, no graven images of me. Now, he had instructed them to make things like the Ark of the Covenant and the cherubim that were over that. That's okay. But there was to be no representation of God because God's invisible. He is the unseeable God. He's the invisible God. And here they make this calf. I think maybe they get this idea. Remember how we had the Apis bull in Egypt? Maybe that's where the idea comes from. Maybe it comes from somewhere else. I don't know. Um, but they had manufactured a golden calf, and Moses comes down. He saw the calf and the dancing. People are worshiping, and Moses' anger burned, and he threw the tablets from his hands and shattered them at the foot of the mountain. Verse 25, now when Moses saw that the people were out of control, for Aaron, that's Moses' brother, for Aaron had let them get out of control to be a derision among their enemies, then Moses stood in the gate of the camp and said, whoever is for the Lord, come to me. And the sons of the sons of Levi, this is one of the tribes of Israel, all the sons of Levi gathered together to him, like, we're with you. And Moses instructs them, go get your weapons. Here he says, verse 27, he said to them, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, every man of you put his sword upon his thigh and go back and forth from gate to gate in the camp and kill every man his brother and every man his friend and every man his neighbor. So the sons of Levi did as Moses instructed, and about 3,000 men of the people fell that day. This is them taking the judgment of God, not to pagans out there, but to people that are breaking the covenant. And 3,000 people die. Now, when we get to the New Testament, there's an incident in Acts chapter 2 where we have the giving of the Spirit. In the giving of the law, that had been in Exodus chapter 20, chapters 20 to chapter 32, culminated by this event of judgment. when we get to Acts chapter 2, and uh, that takes place on a feast called the Feast of Pentecost, which in New Testament times, the Jewish people were using to commemorate the giving of the law. And yet something else gets given on that particular day. In Exodus, we saw them at Mount Sinai. Here in Acts chapter 2, this is taking place at Jerusalem. In Exodus and at the Sinai, we saw that the judgment of God is taken through the camp because of their disobedience, and 3,000 are put to death at the hands of the Levites. In Acts chapter 2, the Spirit comes, and Peter gets up and shares the gospel with the people that have gathered they've heard this gift of tongues, and they've seen this really weird things going on. And Peter gets up and he shares the gospel. And at the end of the chapter, we see 3,000 people become spiritually alive and are baptized and enter the church at the preaching of the gospel. It's a wonderful picture of how you had the old covenant, but now the new covenant, one that brought death, but the other that brings life to the people that are there. Now, chapter 33, verse 15. Then he said to him, and what God says is, look, Moses, I'll tell you what, let's just take off you and me, and we're going to leave Israel behind. They've been disobedient. They're hopeless. And Moses intercedes on behalf of the people to God, and he says to God, if your presence does not go with us, do not lead us up from here. For how then can it be known that I found favor in your sight, I and your people? Is it not by your going with us, so that we, I and your people, may be distinguished from all other people who are upon the face of the earth? Lord, don't send us off to go into the land by ourselves. Don't send us anywhere. We want to stay with you. And there's this intercessory prayer, Moses interceding for the people of God. And God says, okay, I'm going to go with you. The Lord said to Moses, I will also do this thing of which you have spoken, for you have found favor in my sight, and I have known you by name. And now Moses goes from there to make a request for himself. Then Moses said, I pray you, show me your glory. Now the word glory, kabod, literally, it's your weightiness. Sometimes we hear glory in our English word, and we think something majestic and shining and bright. And I guess that idea could be there, but really, the word kabod means heaviness, something that's weighty. And remember that they classified value by its weight. They didn't have coins or paper money, and so they would count out precious metals and see how much it weighed. And of course, gold weighs more than silver, so gold was considered more valuable. And Lord, show me your glory, show me your value, show me your heaviness. And he said, this is God speaking back, I myself will make all my goodness pass before you, and will proclaim the name of the Lord before you, and I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and will be compassion, and will show compassion on whom I will show compassion. But he said, you cannot see my face, for no one can see me and live. I'm the invisible God. That's why you couldn't do an image of God, because he can't be seen. But I'm going to do something. I'm going to make my goodness pass before you. So in verse 21, the Lord said, behold, there is a place by me, and you shall stand there on the rock. Remember what the rock had represented earlier back in chapter 17, where the rock represented Jesus. You'll stand there on the rock, and it will come about while my glory is passing by, that I will put you in the cleft of the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. So again, the rock becomes the place of safety. The rock that before had been the place of God's judgment. The rock was struck, and water came forth. And now the rock becomes the place of safety, the place where Moses can see not really the glory of God. You can't really see that, but we'll see in a second. He can see something, and we'll see how it's described. Verse 23, then I will take my hand away, and you shall see my back. Now, That's okay as a translation, but actually, the term is my afterword. I like to call it God's afterglow. Have you ever been out in a thunderstorm and lightning flashed, but you weren't looking at the lightning, you were sort of looking away, but you catch it out of the corner of your eye and you look and you can see something, but by that time it's gone. And I think the same idea, the same description is here, his afterward, his afterglow. But my face shall not be seen. You can't really see me. You can just see a little bit of the after effect. And after Moses sees this, he's going to come back down from the mountain. He's going to be glowing. So he sees a little bit of the afterglow, and his face is actually going to be shining so much that they will take a veil and put it over his face, because seeing God is just a big thing, and he can't see God, but he can see this afterglow experience. Now, we had the commands for building the tabernacle. That was chapters 25 through 31. And then we have the golden calf incident that we just looked at. But now, beginning in chapter 35 and to the end of the book, we're going to see the tabernacle being built according to the instructions that had been given in chapter 25 through 31. Now, notice, you could have said all that. You could have said everything in chapter 35 through 40 in one verse. You could have said, and the Israelites followed the instructions that were given, and they built the tabernacle. But instead, what you have is chapter after chapter after chapter of being described the actions of doing that. And the question that I have is why? Why do we had the instructions, and now we have chapter after chapter after chapter of them following the instructions and the description of them doing it. And I think the reason why, maybe there's other reasons too, but I think the main reason is to build suspense. As you see getting closer and closer to completion, finally the tabernacle is completed and everything has been done. And now something spectacular happens. God enters the building. And we read chapter 40 and verse 34, the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. That's the climactic event in the book of Exodus, where God shows up. They have prepared a place for him, and now he is going to tent with them, to borrow that phrase from Genesis chapter 9. God enters the building, and he is with his people.